Raz. Introduce you and
Yeah,
then
okay.
okay, so perhaps we should start. Dear renowned guests, dear colleagues, dear friends, it's my great pleasure and honor to conduct this presidential session on the role of sociology in a changing world. Because we all agree that the intensiveness, the complexity of the social, political, and economic changes in recent years calls for reflection on the place of sociology, on knowledge, and the role of sociologists in the public debate. So we want to pose a question. Shall sociologists now assume a greater responsibility for identifying social processes, for explaining their nature, for explaining possible consequences of what's going on right now in the world? And if so, how can we effectively communicate the results of our research to the public? And we have 5 presidents of international and national sociological associations. So we are honored to have Sari Hanafi, the president of the International Sociological Association. He works at the American University in Beirut, and he is also a creator of the portal for social impact of scientific research in the Arab world. He specializes in sociology of religion, in sociology of forced migration and transnational justice. And one of his latest book is the book on knowledge production in the Arab world. The second presenter is Marta Soler-Gallard. She is a newly elected president of the European Sociological Association. She works at the University of Barcelona, and she is the editor of International Sociology Journal. She also is a director of Community of Research on Excellence for All. And she's an author of a quite recent book on achieving social impact, Sociology in the Public Sphere. It was published in 2017. Our third guest is Anna Wesely, the president of the Hungarian Sociological Association. She works at the Eötvös Loránd University in Budapest, and she's editor-in-chief of the Budapest Review of Books. Her research concentrates on intellectual history, on sociology of knowledge, and also on arts. And our fourth presenter will be Professor Christine Williams, the president of American Sociological Association, who works at the University of Texas in Austin. And she specializes in gender studies, race studies, class inequality, and also inequality in the workplace, on sexual harassment. And she is also the author of several books on gender, and she was an editor of Gender and Society Journal. Our last presenter is the president of Polish Sociological Association, so I perhaps do not have to introduce him to you, but he works at the University of Łódź, and as we all know, he specializes in qualitative sociology, sociology of interaction, and methodology of social sciences, and also on contemporary spirituality. And he is a certified yoga teacher. So we start. The first word in the debate will have Sari Hanafi.
Thank you so much, Kaya. Just before my clock starts, I would like just to say a few words about ISA. I am, on behalf of ISA, I am extremely honored to be with you. I am so amazed by the quality so far, what I attended of panels, papers presented in your Congress. So I'm so glad. I encourage you to be more proactive. East Europe, in ISA, East Europe is not very well presented, and when we look to the many figures about participation in Congress and in the forum, in different congresses and the forums of ISA. So I encourage you. Next one will be in Porto Alegre in July 2020, and actually the call for participation until the end of September. Okay, so let me say that I do a lot of bibliometric studies, and maybe it's I can easily deliver a good news and a bad news. If I would start by good news, that more and more we see visibility of social research produced by sociologists, but I will talk about social science in general, that this research is, we find it in visible in English outlet, international journals, what we say, but beyond that. So we have statistically, finally, the schema between center and peripheries it's broken. You have, for instance, China is a newcomer, very important. Russia, Turkey, and if I talk about this region, but also other countries, it's also very important. Well, the bad news, this is where I think the whole social science, it's in a crisis. is that knowledge produced but not used, or not necessarily used. And when I talk about my empirical work on the Arab world, it's very clear that there is here a problem. So, actually, 5 years ago, I published an article called publish locally and perish globally versus publish globally and perish locally. And actually, this is absolutely two profile. We find it in many countries in the world, that you have two elite formations: those who publish internationally with very little impact locally, and vice versa. And I would say this is against the ethos of science, where I think internationalization and local relevance should go hand by hand and not either or. So, of course, more and more I discover a third profile that under the commodification of higher education and neoliberalism in academia, that perish locally and globally. That when you teach 7 courses per semester, I mean, definitely you cannot publish. So, let me go quickly to show you where is the crisis started, where I see the problem, if you like. I will focus on the bad news today. So if I take the outstanding the typology produced by Michael Barraway about the research activities. So we know that we should put the question: knowledge for whom and knowledge for what. So there is no knowledge just thrown like this, whether we are oriented toward the academic audience or extra academic audience, and whether the finality is for policy or just for critique. And I analyze the work of Wibke Kim, a German excellent sociologist, about the production in South Africa. So based on her, I would describe, and I found that this is the best way we can imagine, if you like, that the center, if we look to the center of knowledge production is the university, is based on research, on the program, and then you have a policy moment and the public moment. And public moment, it means when you raise public awareness, you engage with different constituencies and policy, you know. And of course, critical is where it's not necessarily empirical research, but I mean, you step back a little bit and you look on general. So this is in South Africa. My work on the Arab world, I don't have time to talk about methodology, but if you are interested, just ask me how I draw. This is based on mathematical model. So, because much of the funding come from external funder, European, but now is a Gulf. It's rather a policy study, bigger than professional study, and the public is small. But what is very important is don't look only to the size of the research activities, but they are not very connected like the previous one. So policy research is not necessarily started. There is no professional moment, and then we do policy moment, and the public is also disconnected. We have a figure in the Arab world that you don't find it elsewhere. For instance, I analyzed the op-eds in the newspapers in Lebanon and other places, and I found that you have a category of writer. Is 72% of those who write op-eds is a writer. So what is a writer or political analyst? So it's not just to compare it to the academics in Lebanon, for instance, you have only 4% of op-eds written by academics. While in France, if you look to Le Monde and Libération, it's is absolutely the opposite. I mean, yeah. So go ahead. The situation is not as bad as in the. This is when I describe Arab East, Lebanon, Palestine, Syria, Jordan, etc. If you take the North African countries, the Arab, you find the situation is much better, and the centrality of the university is very, very important. There, for instance, more and more, it's not the university who produce the social research. Yeah, so I will show you a kind of distortion. So I took a famous human development report produced by UNDP to find that only 12% of the references are academic publications. So if you take UN document and international organization, it's more than 65%. So it means the two-thirds that it's a self-sufficient. It's ancestry. It's the UN legitimize UN document. So it didn't go through the filter of academic publication. Can you go? Just to give you other examples, and again, I don't have really time, but I analyzed 520 articles written in 2011 about the Arab uprisings in English, Arabic, and the French. So we analyze the co-occurrence, the citation co-occurrence. So it means who cite whom. So what is very interesting that actually it's very interesting that the most important prominent Arab and scholars who produce knowledge often it's in op-eds are not cited by academic journals, neither in English nor in Arabic. So it means that who tell the story in the end is not the academic journals. It's elsewhere. So I have evidence from this. Can you go, please? Yeah. So this is where I need to develop some ideas that, in fact, you have a different model worldwide, how you engage academic knowledge with the policy and with the public. I don't distinguish so much between public and policy because more and more with the civil society actors, I mean, one jump here, one jump there. So, but we have, if you like, two models. The American model where relies so much in a private knowledge producers, especially think tanks, but European is more more research organization. Still is very public one, and semi-public is still very important. Please. So just to give you three examples I study. So this is, I participate on it. I was a student of and working with Alain Touraine and the Cadiz in France, where I noticed, for instance, how in the veil issue and whether it to be prohibited by the government, the women pupil to go to school with their veil or not. They order a white paper, and Alain Touraine was one of the producer of this paper. And what is very interesting that the white paper just presented by the minister, just he introduced the 13 member, and he stepped back, and the head of the committee who talk. So actually, it's an education of public to say, on behalf of science, we have some result about this issue. So this is where I come to the idea that so important, the trust on science, and this should be cultivated among public. I found in Lebanon the opposite case, where a huge crisis, garbage crisis in Lebanon, where only the prime minister mentioned that there is a study. When he was so provoked by the presenter of the TV, he said, no, we use some research and there is a paper. So here where I show, for instance, that in fact there is no trust of science and all this process, but the good side that civil society who did a social movement in Lebanon used so much research done. The case where also I was so much engaged on it until to keep my sanity, I left the question of Palestinian refugees in Lebanon because they live in such a miserable situation. And I show that, in fact, the more you produce knowledge, the more the decision maker, they ask for more research. So actually, it's why, please, can you go? Why I think the work of Robert Proctor about agnotology or engineering ignorance is make so much sense, is socially constructed and politically imposed ignorance. And so the ignorance is not a simple omission of gap, but something that is made, maintained, and manipulated. In spite of a census that showing that you have only 170,000 Palestinians in Lebanon, the decision maker today in Lebanon keep talking about 500,000, which is absolutely untrue. So how this manufacture ignorance, and here maybe lead me to Bruno Latour work on. It's extremely important about that. In fact, is more and more facts is become robust, not because of the strength of their validation, but because whether we should, the three questions we should raise to ourselves: whether we have a common culture to support science. And it's very interesting, and here where the breakthrough of Bruno Latour in the passion of secularism, laïcité in France, they say maybe church help in creating common culture of respecting science, but also the institution, whether the institution, we trust the institution or not. And I think here a big question about commodification of higher education. What is our university? And the third thing is the media. And I think really this is extremely important. This is why we cannot afford sociologists just to publish in academic journals or to have our beautiful meetings like this without engaging with the media, because wherever there is a very interesting studies that how the alternative facts using other common culture, which is more and more, we don't have it for fact, the institution they use, they have an institution they trust more than us. This is the politicians, for instance, who create the populist parties, and the media. I mean, they have through social media and so on. I mean, I can extend much more with the many conclusion. Just again, the question of trust is very important. Is just to say yes. For instance, when you work on authoritarian system, I mean, it's a big question whether really the authoritarian regime wanted fact or not. I mean, again, I'm saying if I look from the Arab world, I mean, the situation is much more complex. Just to say that we should acknowledge the work of international organizations, civil society, that as a knowledge producer now compared to the university. So what to deal with them, what about peer review, all this is complexity. I mean, I will stop here to say it really put us on a way to rethink how we should work, we academics. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sari. It was an excellent, brilliant presentation, and I am sure that we will have many questions. I myself have at least 4. So now, Marta Soler-Gallard, the president of the European Sociological Association. The floor is yours. This is not this presentation.
Yes. Okay. So I want to thank you, also the Polish Association, for having invited me. I really also am honored to be here today. Actually, I was recently elected president of the European Sociological Association just a few weeks ago. And so this is my first conference in Europe going as a president, and I'm very honored to be here with you. And especially because now we have this challenging question, like what is the role of sociology today? No? And we had to talk about this. So I'm going to talk about can I just pass myself? Thank you. About the social impact. That my main message is what I put here is that today we have the best moment for sociology, and I'm going to argue that this is the best moment. Although we know that people talk about sociology in crisis and that nobody wants us, nobody wants to listen to us, but I'm going to argue the opposite. Okay, so and the reason is that we are leading the new orientations of the new research programs for all sciences. And so I will talk about the new framework program of research of the European Commission, Horizon Europe. All the new missions have a social dimension. Societal impact is now prioritized, and there is this buzzword of co-creation with citizen stakeholders that is now being promoted. So I'm going to talk about these three things. In the creation of the new research program of framework program of FP9, framework program of research, Horizon Europe, there has been several documents already published by the European Commission. One is this one, monitoring of impact of framework programs, and this is the document with all the indicators that they're going to be used for the analyzing, evaluating, monitoring the impact of the next funding in Horizon Europe. And when this document actually they selected a panel of experts with 17 experts from all sciences, and the chair of this panel was a sociologist. No? Why? Because if we are going to talk about impact of science, this is not only about talking about mathematics or engineering, health, is how all this research is being used, is being listened to by society. And it is something that we sociologists know a lot about this, about society. So the chair was is a sociologist, and one of the writers of this document that is now the basis for the next framework program. As you know, the next framework program now is focusing not on the EU agenda, but on the Sustainable Development Goals. So we may say it is buzzword, but the orientation is the UN goals, which is these are goals that have been, poverty, gender equality, hunger, decent labor, I can go on and on, peace and justice. So these are areas of society that we work. So if all the research is focusing to this end, to these global challenges, we have a lot to say and to collaborate with other scientists from different disciplines. No? And this is something that also Merton was already saying. No? He was claiming for this universalism of science. No? And actually, I think that things that he said when he wrote Sociology of Science, he would have never imagined that we would be leading this transformation of the framework programs of research, and will be so important for other scientists. Why we are so important? We organized in Barcelona an international conference on social impact of science. This was 3 years ago, and we invited, we had Nobel Prizes in medicine, in chemistry, in physics, and and they were talking about the social impact, no? And I'm going to put an example of one of the speakers, and he was Harald Thurhausen. He spoke about how his whole trajectory, he was researching about the connection between infection agents, viruses, no? A particular kind of viruses, and human cancer, particular kinds of tumors of human cancer. And he actually found this connection, and this is the basis, he researches is the basis, for instance, of the papilloma vaccine. But he told us, I have found this, no? But I'm not the one who should say whether it is better that health departments invest on universalization of papilloma vaccine, or if should invest, or there should be more checkups, no, from medical checkups in primary medicine, no. So this is not my role, no. I don't know. I need you to discuss, to research on that, no. And he was telling this to us this, he needs social scientists, but he also needs social scientists who engage with the population about what is best, no, for the population. He knows that there is a connection, but what is best for the population, no? What kind of policies, what kind of actions is best for the population? And that is why he said, we need you, no? We need you to channel all this knowledge in relationship to society. And what we have seen also in science in general, and what is part of the problem that the European Commission is having now with all the billions of euros invested in science, in research, is like, how are they going to explain why they should invest so many billions of euros, no? And we have seen what I think that Max Weber already talked about, the bureaucratization, no, of society, but we have seen a bureaucratization of science, no, and a loss of meaning when there is this career for publishing and more publishing. Already Sari was talking about this commodification, and there has been already a movement talking about science is a human right. Citizens should know about science. This should be open. It should be accessible to all, and needs to be to recover a little bit of the meaning of research and science. It is societies, citizens are why research and science are meaningful, no? It's not just a career of publishing and producing knowledge. Knowledge, I mean, he said knowledge for what and for whom, no? So this is a key, and to break this bureaucratization of loss of meaning in all sciences, social sciences are key. And my argument is that already the European Commission, at least in the framework program of research, is already taking this direction. No? And if you get this document of monitoring social impact, the key pathway indicators, no? There are two which are like engaging, well, I'm focusing on this, engaging EU citizens. So the research that will be funded will be evaluated, no? At short, middle, and long term, whether this research has been engaged, the knowledge produced has been engaged and uptaken, no? By citizens. No? And there are these three levels, no? Short, and medium, and long term. The indicators, and for instance, at the short term, no, one indicator that there will be citizens uptaking this knowledge, no, is that there will be co-creation of knowledge. This is a new buzzword that if you read European documents from research, you know, they all talk about co-creation of knowledge, no, co-creation with citizens, with stakeholders, different stakeholders. So if we engage in co-creation of knowledge throughout the research, since the beginning of the research process, it is more likely that it will end up having a social impact, that the innovations of our knowledge, no, will be taken by society. No? And, but co-creation, which is now like this big word, no, is something that we have already been doing for many years. No? And this is the result of a project that was funded, that was funded by the 5th framework program in the European Commission, Commission. It was about the Roma people in Europe. Yeah, and so the results of the project were approved by the European Parliament in the recognition of the Roma people as a people of Europe. And this was actually in 2005. And so throughout the project, and this is the final conference, which took place in the European Parliament in the headquarters, there were different policymakers at national level, regional, European level. There were Roma people from Roma associations. Here you have the president of the Roma Women Association, and she was illiterate, illiterate Roma grandmother, and she was the president. Researchers, and all in dialogue throughout the whole project. And this is something that, for instance, Habermas already talks in the Theory of Communicative Action. In the first volume, there is one chapter, chapter 4, which is dedicated to understanding, the problem of understanding meaning in social sciences. 1 minute. Okay, so he says not that there is a methodological gap between researchers and social actors, but when there is a communicative action or dialogic process, this communicative gap is no longer exists. So our ontological presuppositions are not of these social actors, and what he says is that when we engage into this dialogical process, we lose our privileged position as observers, and then we, through this dialogical process, we can build together knowledge. And this is already something that is happening in many of our research, and we know how to do this. Yeah? This is an example from the same project, from the Work Color project. It was the 5th framework program, and we had a seminar in Paris, and this is Michel Bibiorka, and in this seminar, he was talking about the idea, a concept of mixed identities, that he said that people are in France 50% French, 50% Algerian, and then in the audience there were researchers, and there were also Roma people from associations and cultural minority association, and this woman, she was a young Roma woman, non-academic, she was from an association, and she said, I have a question, Michel. I don't agree with this, because I am 100% French, I pay 100% taxes, I have the same duties and requirements, but I am also 100% Roma. And what did Michel do? Did he say, oh, you are wrong because I am the sociologist and you don't know? No, he said, oh, that's very interesting. I have to rethink my concept. And this is a very a quick example of this idea of co-creation of knowledge, that now all sciences are obliged to do that if they want to get funding from the EU, and we have done that for many years. And we know how to do that, and we can collaborate with other scientists in doing that with sociologists. So this is again the main message of what I wanted to say in these 15 minutes, that the current approach of the scientific programs, like for instance Horizon Europe, is the best opportunity we have to be recognized by all sciences and also by society. And this is already happening. And we can discuss about this later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marta. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us, and thank you for the very positive attitude that we really need here. And now Anna Veseli from Hungary, President of Hungarian Sociological Association.
Yeah, I have to begin with apologizing. First, I have a cold, and it might be problems with my voice and reading the text. The second point I want to apologize for is I will read the paper because I have got 15 minutes to present a national case, which is a pretty complicated one, and I try to get as much into it as possible. So if it's too fast or I'm not clear, then please just interrupt me and I will try. So the question is actually, the title is Who Needs Sociology? So in the abstract for this talk that I sent the conference organizers in March, I propose to define the social role of sociology along the lines suggested by role theory, That is not with the useful social functions sociologists claim to be able to fulfill, but by what certain social groups and public collective actors expect sociology to deliver, and then confront these expectations with sociology's self-understandings. The momentous changes in the institutional setup of scientific and scholarly research imposed by the government of Hungary since then have altered the positions and prospects of sociology to such an extent in my country that I feel compelled to redesign my argument. Classical roles theory defines roles by the expectations of individuals or their groups concerning the behavior and actions of a social agent. When we speak of the role of an institution or a scholarly discipline, it is mostly in retrospect, referring to their contributions to some state of affairs. As far as I know, there have hardly ever been social demands or expectations leveled at sociology by any specific group or institution, excepting vague references to as yet not grasped or clearly understood processes in society. Its social role is not achieved but assigned and will generally be expressed mainly in the form of mission statements by sociologists themselves. Max Weber claimed that sociology could offer points of orientation for finding one's way in a seemingly chaotic world. Later sociologists discovered patterns that could easily be redefined as structures, and soon this idea got extended to understanding societies as systems of structures. Other early sociologists like Karl Mannheim suggested that sociology could offer its services as an interpreter mediating between opposing groups in deeply divided contemporary societies and thus enable political discourse and promote negotiations toward an agreement if such was possible at all. Interestingly, strong demand for that interpretational service was voiced in several Western countries in the 1960s. Sociological studies became bestsellers and informed public discourse. The sudden popularity and its following demise could be best illustrated by the number of sociology majors at American universities. The number peaked at 35,000 graduates in 1973, but sank to 14,000 graduates by 1988. A somewhat similar process could be observed in Eastern Europe and the Global South in the 1970s and 80s. Due to my ignorance of its phases in other countries, I prefer to stick to the Hungarian story. Here, sociology was banned as a bourgeois pseudoscience in 1950. Then began to have a kind of clandestine existence within the Central Statistical Office in the early 1960s, and even a small research group in sociology could start working within the Hungarian Academy of Sciences in 1963. It took another decade to set up a department of sociology at Eötvös Loránd University in Budapest. At the same time, however, sociology at the Central Statistical Office was restricted in its scope, and three major sociologists from the Academy Research Institute, Agnes Heller, Ivan Szelényi, and István Kemény, were forced to leave the country, and that they could re-enter only after 1989. Still, by the time I graduated in sociology and began teaching it at the university in 1981, the discipline had become institutionally anchored in higher education, while research at the Academy Research Institute and even at the Social Research Institute of the State Party kept on producing impressive results. In 1992, Magyar Tudomány, that is the official journal of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences, published 5 interviews under the title Sociology in Jeopardy, conducted with sociologists representing 3 generations, 4 of them full-time researchers and 1 university professor. Conflicting conceptions of the role of sociology in the new political and social context resulted in an institutional crisis of a very particular kind at the Academy Research Institute of Sociology. Sociologists felt that that work had lost its formerly enjoyed social importance, that neither the new power holders nor the masses, habitually excluded from power, were interested in what sociologists could tell them about themselves, about the processes and experiences of what was called at the time the transition to democracy and the market economy. One group declared that adaptation to the new conditions involved producing marketable research results closer to the multinational corporations active in our country and to the national system of innovation, that is research plus development, while the other group insisted on adherence to a socially and culturally committed sociology focusing on poverty, the integration of the Roma minority, non-profit organizations, and health policy. They wanted to understand the process of the reproduction of poverty and of negative social privilege. The conflict within the profession was not about taking sides and renouncing that detached perspective that had been allegedly required by genuine professionalism, but rather about the appropriate role of sociology at the time of fundamental social change. In general, Hungarians cannot deal with conflicts very well. If there is no ready solution at hand, they prefer to evade the fight by institutionalizing and keeping apart both antagonistic positions. This is what happened within the Sociological Research Institute of the Academy. It split into two institutes, with Agnes Losenzi at the head of the Remainers. The Leavers founded a social conflict research center, but were soon to be disappointed. There was no market demand for their tentatively mainstream product either. Their alternative institution died off by 1998. In the 1992 interview, Agnes Losenzi spoke of the factors that had made several sociologists seek for a new definition of their social role. I can't. Okay, I leave it at that. Another interlocutor at the interview was Ivan Szerényi. Returning from exile, he fully committed himself to the reform of the discipline and became the first president of the regenerated Hungarian Sociological Association in 1990. In the interview, he set up a diagnosis of the grave institutional as well as intellectual crisis of Hungarian social science and outlined a therapeutic program. As to the intellectual crisis, he claimed that the collapse of the redistributive state entails the collapse of that quasi-market that used to create a demand for sociological research within our state socialist system. Many of my colleagues have misunderstood the practice of financing research prevalent in the past decade or two, believing that there is a demand for the research outputs in a genuine market. But I think they were wrong. What they took for market demand had been generated merely by the conspicuous consumption of some bureaucratic state institutions with soft budget constraints. And he added, let's face it, sociology is an ivory tower discipline with slight practical use and no real market demand for what it delivers. It is like historiography, literary criticism, or art history in having a crucial part in shaping shared cultural knowledge and worldviews. The intellectual crisis of the discipline was due to the fact that Hungarian sociology in the 1980s had been deeply divided with no communication or respect between official and oppositional sociologists. The task was therefore twofold. So official sociology had to become respected and popular in order to attract good students to the university, and the role suited to oppositional sociology had to be found again in the rising capitalist society. It was deemed crucial that the discipline should avoid becoming an apologetic commentator on the new powers that be, and develop instead a critical social theory and foster that kind of productive sociological imagination that had fueled so much of the best research in Hungary in the previous 2 decades. And the rest of my paper concerns the involvement or interference of politics, power politics in sociology. So in this connection, let me recall what Bourdieu said in his Leçons sur la leçon lecture. I quote, sociology has to beware equally of the powers that demand too much from it and those that would love to see it perish. Social demand is always a mixture of pressure, command, and seduction, and therefore the greatest service one could do to sociology would perhaps be to expect nothing from it. Several of the best oppositional sociologists of the 1980s became prominent political actors and left the profession after 1989, while the rest had to resign to social invisibility in spite of their valuable research output. And of course, there was the shocking lack of funds for extensive quantitative research, which on the one hand reinvigorated grounded theory, on the other hand ethnographic field research on the other. But there is a new problem that it's extremely difficult to do ethnography in a country where general mistrust makes people refuse to talk to sociologists or researchers at all. Why I speak of issues that troubled sociologists almost 30 years ago, because some of them have found promising solutions, but others have resurfaced with a vengeance. And I have just two examples. One example is explicit censorship in several aspects. One is the actual prohibition of gender studies, teaching gender studies at the universities. The other was actually the drawing in of a journal issue where there was a paper that was critical of the educational system of Hungary, and so on. So that it was actually really classical censorship. And when there is money for research, let's say for government-funded research, then the government sort of regards it as its own property. Now I would like to have, oh yes, this photo. So what happens there is every fourth year a big survey of Hungarian youth in Hungary that's going on already for 15 or more years. It's of the cohort aged 15 to 29. And the leader of the main researcher wrote about the 2012 survey as follows, I quote, "The basic factor structuring the lives of the young in Hungary is uncertainty, and in some cases even insecurity. For they live in a world where uncertainty is structurally coded in the subsystems of society, and blurred traditions have been replaced by unclear and distant points of orientation. In this shifting world, young people are less inclined to commit themselves to marry and have a family. They are unsure about their preferences concerning the choice between graduate studies and regular employment, and answering the question of should I stay or should I go, that is, go abroad or stay in Hungary." Now, the 2016 survey confirmed these claims after 4 years. But when the first batches of the collected data was presented in print as well as on the internet in 2017, state officials felt entitled, in spite of protests from the research team, to append a cover page visually representing what they wanted the public to see as the main trends of change. Basically, this is the graphics that they presented there, and it clearly negates the results of the research and tries to present it as a solution that has been achieved to the problems that have been sort of registered in 2012. It concerns mainly emigration or working abroad, employment, and of course family and gender issues, and it basically seems to be quoting from the survey results, but it's absolutely all false. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna, and I'm sure that there will be a lot of questions at the end of our session. And now the president of American Sociological Association, Christine Williams, and we slightly changed the topic because she will concentrate on the issue of sexual harassment.
My very good friend Slava Tolme is here, and is this on? She told me I had to tell the audience that my grandparents were Polish. My mother's maiden name is Fiontek. She is going to love that I said that out loud in Poland. So thank you so much for inviting me here today. It's my first visit to Poland. I'm very grateful for having this opportunity. I especially am grateful to Kaya, who's not listening to me right now, but she was absolutely critical in sending me, I think, all the materials available about Polish feminism in English. So thank you so much for that. Well, I think I learned... Well, I'm very grateful, and I have a lot to learn still, but I'm very grateful for what you sent me. So our conference theme is Me, Us, and Them, which is a perfect context to talk about the Me Too movement. It's a global movement that's bringing together individual survivors of sexual harassment, the me, into a community of activists, the us, who are identifying sexual harassers, the them, and working to rid society of sexual violence. In a very short time, the movement has become a powerful force in society, inspiring fresh dialogue about an incessant social problem. Fundamentally, the Me Too movement is a demand for human dignity. Demands for human dignity often drive contemporary social movements. However, those who make such demands can risk further stigma, marginalization, and even violence. My goal in this talk is to highlight how different social contexts condition those risks. I address how three social institutions in particular, the law, I thought there was another one, okay, not yet. The law, the workplace, and the political arena can support and or thwart workers' demands for dignity. But first, a little bit of social background. The Me Too movement began in 2006 as an effort to support African American women and girls. Activist Tarana Burke, pictured there on your left, used the phrase Me Too on social media to address the problem of sexual violence in the Black community. The work that Burke started became a global movement 11 years later when white women celebrities in Hollywood took up the cause. In 2017, actor and activist Alyssa Milano, pictured there on your right, used the expression Me Too in response to published reports about media magnate Harvey Weinstein, who had allegedly harassed, assaulted, and raped women in the entertainment arena for many years. So using the hashtag #MeToo, Milano invited her Twitter followers to reply if they had ever experienced sexual harassment, and the rest is history. On Facebook, her tweet was shared more than 12 million times in 24 hours, including in Poland, where it was tweeted out nearly 35,000 times in 7 days. The Me Too movement remains a strong force today. An app by Google called Me Too Rising witnesses day by day where the hashtag is trending around the world, and I took this screenshot in July, on July 31st. The movement has empowered millions of people around the world to speak out about their experiences of sexual harassment, and those with access to the social media are using the hashtag to reveal their personal experiences, accuse their harassers, often anonymously, and offer support to others. However, we know very little about who is empowered to speak out, who faces retaliation, who risks losing their jobs. And this, I believe, is where sociologists come in and brings me to the main point of my talk, sociology's role in the fight against sexual harassment. We sociologists can identify the social contexts that enable or silence the victims of sexual harassment from coming forward, speaking out, and demanding dignity. I'll briefly discuss three social contexts that influence workers' willingness to speak out when they experience harassment, beginning with the legal context. Sexual harassment is banned by many international treaties, national laws, and corporate policies, but how sexual harassment is defined and how the bans are enforced vary considerably at each of these different levels. For example, at the national level, countries vary in how they even define sexual harassment. In the United States, sexual harassment is a violation of equal employment law. This is in contrast to France, where sexual harassment is defined as sexual violence, and New Zealand, where sexual harassment is defined as a violation of human rights. Each of these frameworks, I argue, has implications for who is empowered to speak out and whether or not they can claim redress for their experiences of harassment. In the US, for example, there are many different barriers to speaking out against sexual harassment. The only legal redress there is basically to sue your employer, which costs millions of dollars and is only successful in 2% of cases, half of which are overturned on appeal. Another major barrier in the US using the legal system is the idea of non-disclosure agreements, which people often are forced to sign if they win a sexual harassment case, meaning they're silenced, they're not allowed to speak about the experiences that they've had. And the third and perhaps less well-known restriction on legal speech in the United States is called non-disparagement clauses. And these are clauses of many different employment contracts that workers are forced to sign. And I'm just going to give you a boilerplate example of this. This is from the Harvard Business Review. I did not make this up. American employees have to sign a form that says, "You shall not, at any time, directly or indirectly, disparage the company, including making or publishing any statement, written, oral, electronic, or digital, truthful or otherwise, which may adversely affect the business, public image, reputation, or goodwill of the company, including its operations, employees, directors, and its past, present, or future products or services." Wow, right? This is a very good example of how the legal context silences people from complaining about sexual harassment. The main point I'm making here is that the legal context can act as a barrier to workers' willingness to step forward and make a claim of harassment. By implication, I'm arguing in contexts where workers have strong legal protections, including guarantees of free speech and job security, they may be more empowered to step forward and make claims about sexual harassment. The second context I want to talk about is the workplace. Workers' willingness and ability to speak out against harassment also depends on the organizational and occupational context of their jobs. By organizational context, I'm talking about the distribution of power in the workplace. The Weinstein case demonstrated in very clear ways that many men control many different workplaces in a sense that they have almost absolute power over the people who work for them, the ability to hire and fire and promote people without any kind of stop, any kind of restriction on that power. And this is, of course, the characteristic of many different industries, not only in the entertainment world, but many others as well. Some sociologists are arguing that flatter and more democratic organizations are better at enabling workers to speak out against sexual harassment. When power is distributed more equally at work, workers may be more empowered to step forward and demand an end to sexual harassment. By occupational context, I'm talking about the division of labor in the workplace. Here, the issue is whether you're working in a predominantly female job, which often has a sexualized aspect to it, or in a male-dominated job where women and non-conforming men workers may be harassed as a form of retaliation and as a way to force them out of the workplace. In both of these contexts, my point is workers may be forced to put up with sexual harassment in order to keep their jobs. Occupational context also matters. Finally, the political context matters. This is where all the stuff I read about Poland really comes in. But throughout the world, women's rights and LGBT rights are embattled. In the US, these have become potent symbols for both conservatives and for liberal politicians, and feminist voices are often missing in the policy arena. You may not realize this, but the current US president has been rolling back women's rights and LGBTQ rights. He's been boasting of sexually harassing women. By doing all of these things, he signals support for conservative and traditional relationships between men and women. He gestures to the right wing about his support for their traditional views about gender. An example of that recently, he didn't even show up for the G7 meeting that was held in June of last year when they were talking about gender issues. There they are waiting for him to arrive. The U.S. president's behavior, I believe, can be understood as part of a global political backlash against feminism that's sometimes referred to as anti-genderism. It's a concept that's been theorized by a number of Polish feminist scholars. It refers to a transnational right-wing political movement opposed to women's rights and LGBTQ rights. It defines international treaties on sexual violence and harassment as threats to the heterosexual nuclear family. And interestingly, this political ideology claims to be fighting for the right to preserve the dignity of local cultures against the interests of international elites, thereby appropriating language from the Me Too movement to undermine feminism. Now, the rise of this global right-wing populism has led to massive feminist protests around the world. It is one factor, I think, in the rise of the Me Too movement, but this is my point. It's the political context that can prevent workers from speaking out about sexual harassment as much as the reverse. So let me just summarize that the Me Too movement is a movement for social change, and that we sociologists can contribute to an understanding of how the social context either enables or prevents people from stepping forward. And I want to give you just one example of this. I want to conclude by illustrating how the sociological perspective differs from other approaches. The EU Agency for Fundamental Human Rights conducted a survey of 42,000 women throughout the European Union and found that half of all women in Europe had been victims of sexual harassment. And I don't know if you can see it, but the word dignity is up there on the cover. So they also, in this study, found a great deal of variation by countries. Denmark and Sweden came in with the highest prevalence of sexual harassment, while Poland, Romania, and Bulgaria, women reported the lowest frequencies. Only women were surveyed. So what are the possible explanations? Well, these numbers could reflect actual differences in the prevalence of sexual harassment. Almost nobody believes that. Number two, these numbers could reflect different understandings or education about sexual harassment. Maybe those women in Poland, Romania, and Bulgaria just don't understand what sexual harassment is. That's the argument of the authors of this report. My argument is a third one. These numbers reflect different social contexts that empower or silence those experiencing sexual harassment from speaking out. I'm actually suggesting that low prevalence rates may be an indication of institutional barriers to speaking out against sexual harassment. And this is where sociologists can contribute to the public discussion. We have the tools to identify how social contexts promote or hinder workers' demands for dignity, and so contribute to social change. Dziękuję. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christine, for drawing our attention to those very, very important issues, and there will be a time for discussion later on. And now Krzysztof Konecki, the president of Polish Sociological Association.
Hello everybody, I have such a presentation. As you see the title, this is the continuation of the morning my presentation, but it was in Polish, but a little bit is it's continuation. And I would like to talk about the life world and death world, and mainly is from the phenomenological perspective, and from the first person perspective, such a kind of research done in the contemplative studies. Then you see what is life world according to Schultz. It's a paramount reality, it's basic reality. Actors are free. We have the stable environment, typification, system of relevances, is also stable, and vast amount of knowledge is taken for granted. We have plans, projects, and we relations. Generally, we are living in the safe environment, in the life world. This is our world. This is the concept, ideal concept, ideal type that we can find in the works of Alfred Schultz. And according to Schultz, it's based on the fundamental anxiety. Everything what we do in the life world, our plans, our typification system of relevances that we create, we want to make bracketing on this awareness of the death. This is the, as he wrote, attitude, natural epoche attitude. And if I'm following here the Zerubbabel concept of remarkable and unremarkable things, and when we look in the Google search, we found the sentence "death on the world" 426 millions times and 1,510,000 life on the earth. The difference is big. We treat the life on earth as something obvious and taken for granted. Death world. I'm inspired here by the work of Valerie Benz from a Fielding Institute in Santa Barbara, and we cooperated with her last semester doing research also in Łódź. And she introduced such a concept as a death world, following, of course, the phenomenological approach by Schultz, not only, to understand the phenomena that are going around the world, and phenomenology needs such concept according to her, and I'm following here her statements, her searching. What is the death world? And then we have the fragmented consciousness, lack of free choice, and destruction of we relationship. Generally, there is a destruction of life world. Actors are not free in some systems completely, and some systems less free. They are not aware of this. As with sexual harassment, we don't know what is it, then we don't mention in the interviews. Not stable the environment, broken life projects, destruction of the we relations, what is important for Schultz to create the social order. What a kind of lived experience, what is phenomenology interested in, appear around the death world? And we have such phenomena as exploitation of nature, and the problem is that this exploitation at that moment contributes to suffering. And the question from the first person perspective is, am I contributing to this? Do I feel it? What I feel it when I participated some way in exploitation of nature, at least eating some kind of food. Economic growth and the technology. This is the they create the problems that leads to increasing of suffering and finally to death of the people and nature. Do I participate in this process? Do I perceive it? This is the next question. And truthful communication. This is the feature of the life world, but here if we use extensive wrong speech in our communication with others through electronic communication, this could create the atmosphere for killing and death and increase of suffering. Do I participate in wrong speech? Wrong speech is connected with making of suffering of other humans and not only humans. There are wars that can save the mankind and humanity. Justification for good wars. Just sometimes we support wars because they are justified from many reasons. Do I support such wars? And suffering is aberration. We should always search for happiness, refuse suffering as a part of life. Such an assumption we take for granted in the Western, at least Western culture. Do I agree with this statement? If we answer positively on these questions, it indicates that, if we are sincere, that we have the lived experience connected with the death world. And we have the hidden assumptions also of the death world. I talked in the morning about frame trap, the concept by Goffman, but I can use it also here. On the deep level, we have such assumptions with distinctive thinking, us and them, me and other, inner and outer. The culture is opposition of the nature, us and them. Distinction, strict distinction in sociology, especially animals and humans, them and us, we are humans, and we still divide in our research, make this distinction. My technology is good and their is bad. And I can use the technology because it belongs to our world, our life world, but the technology the same used by the others from other societies are bad because they can use to kill us. But we can use it because it's our technology and it's for produced for good. Okay. And other distinctions. Our individualistic democratic systems are really democratic and their collectivistic is not correct. Our wars are ethical, their wars are not. And the last one thing is a positive and negative feedback. If we think in these distinctions, that we look for, generally also in the science, we believe in equilibrium, that if we have some supply, then demand will make equal, and if we have demand, and the supply will come and make some equality between these two parts of distinctions. And in climate, also we think that it will in some years it will be some balance as it happens in the previous years and ages, but it will not happen because we have the positive feedback. We want more, demand is bigger, and we also supply more, exploit at the same time the nature, and there will be no equilibrium in the future. But the assumption is, of course, in the economy, especially economics, taken for granted. Then we have the consequence, the destruction of nature. And I have here, from my research around the Łódź city, we are writing the paper with Valerie Benz about deaf world in the city of Łódź. And probably it's not, but it's, we can pass it. Okay, we can pass, come back. Technology. Okay, I can manage without technology. Then we have the spreading the death zones, and we take it for granted, accept it, and we don't want to see it. This is the ignorance collectively produced by politicians, local politicians, and other people. Then probably I shouldn't show this because it's too much. And you see, there is a factory that is called that was called Boruta. Boruta is a devil, Slavic devil, and it is just correct name for this factory that it collapsed, but still left a lot of things that are completely destroyed, and including the nature. And the thing is also that we import the trash from the Western countries, and Germany is very important here, the trader, and we receive these barrels with. We have even the names of these toxins, and 200,000 barrels under the ground now are leaking and producing the gas, and the increase of the cancer is noticeable in the city of Zjazd, and it's on the border of my city, Łódź, and it's also producing. And sometimes the fire happened in these heaps, and we know why, because they don't utilize this, they want to just. And okay, we have such wonderful death zones. We are looking at the death zones on the oceans and in US also, in Utah and so on, but we have also everywhere almost, but we don't notice it, we don't want to notice. And people are still working there around. There is a factory, electric plant, and people are living there also around, very close, and I cannot smell but probably it's a question of time of staying in this place. Okay, zero I have, zero I see. Put me to the zero. Zero is also continue. Then I will one sentence only. F5. Then I didn't finish my presentation, hopefully for you, because I have more words thing here to say about the world, especially about language. Language. We have the language produced that I call it wrong speech. Wrong speech is a Buddhist term that wrong speech produces suffering. And for example, as some of Polish archbishop use the term rainbow plague, rainbow plague. And this has consequences for the people that are on the side of rainbow. We know what, I don't want to explain it. And they suffer, and they express it in social media and everywhere. Another politician said about various types of parasites, protozoa, that are not dangerous in these people's bodies, can be dangerous here. It's about refugees possibly coming to this country, but it didn't happen. But we use often such metaphors of illness just to call people and typify people. That the life word is broken because we have a new typification and system relevances that is produced by media and politicians and generally and also religious rituals. I have one religious ritual connected with the killing of Judah that was responsible for the betrayal of Jesus. And you see the children participating in this ritual. And a lot of fun, but also anger and emotional energy is produced. And institutions of deaf world, hunting associations, breeder association and meat cattle producer. I'm finishing, just showing how the deaf world is created by institutionally also, not only language. Where are emperor's new clothes? Is emperor really naked? And this is the task for the sociologists to catch, to take the problem of the real problems that create deaf world that is coming and is already around us. And this is the problem that should be taken into consideration in our research. But it's difficult to get out from this trap, because you see from this picture that we are afraid to go off the frame. It's nice to be safe in the frame, even if it's frame trap. And another thing is also dangerous for the sociologists, not only sociologists, to go out from the convention. We see here that the frame is broken. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your presentation, although it was so depressing. And may I kindly ask the presenters to come back here, and I would like to thank you all for sharing your knowledge with us, and I think we learned a lot from each other. We shared new ideas that we can later develop in our work. And having a privilege of conducting this session, may I ask one question, pose one question: how to combine scientific excellence with social and political impact? When we have some new research tools, when we have some theoretical frameworks, and still are we able to detect the current trends, social trends, political trends? And if we do, how can we convey our knowledge to the society? How can we get to, with this knowledge, to politicians? How can we change the world and stop some trends that are devastating? Should we do that? So I have another question, because we have presidents of sociological associations here, national associations and international associations. Can we, as associations, do something about it? So now I open the floor for discussion, and please introduce yourself and when you are asking questions, and then we will have about half an hour, perhaps 25 minutes for discussions, because later on, at the end, one of our colleagues will introduce a new journal. So please, the floor is open. Professor Grażyna Skąpska.
So I have something what is not maybe a question, it is rather a short comment. However, there is a question within it, and there is, let's say, make it as a question. During European Sociological Association meeting last 2 weeks ago in Manchester, it was Michel Wiewiórka who stressed the moral aspect of sociology. And here, hearing you, all of your presentations, especially the last two ones by Professor Konecki, by Professor Williams, I have the feeling that it is really a time when this moral aspect of sociological knowledge becomes to be more and more important. So that is exactly connected with this revealing of sexual harassment and exploring those many, let's say, aspects of it and many levels. I am teaching gender and law, so I know something about this legal, let's say, legal level of regulation of sexual harassment, but of course, because that is sociology of law, there is more in that. And that is exactly what, let's say, sociologists can do. So they reveal also not only the, let's say, those frameworks, but also putting the stress at dignity. So that is this moral, let's say, moral reading of sexual harassment issues and gender and law issue in general. So that is something what is very interesting also for me. And that was exactly in the speech of Professor Konecki, who just described this death word. So that is a new language in sociology, and therefore that is, let's say, my observation. Maybe that is exactly what was also hidden in the three other speeches. I have, for instance, the speech agnotology. So I also read that book edited by Robert Proctor, and that is something also moral involved, because this not spreading knowledge, hiding knowledge, manipulating of society, especially by those in power who just spreading false knowledge, which no accountability at all. So that is also something what reveals, let's say, this moral aspect of sociology, which was not the case, because sociology was a science of modernity. And modernity, that was some, let's say some moral thinking, but usually modernity was connected with something else, with instrumental rationality and not with moral aspects. So maybe there is a time that we sociologists reveal something more, and not only, let's say, instrumental or formal rationality of thinking. So that is my comment after your excellent all presentations. So thank you.
So please, we have 2 more questions, or even 4 more questions.
Piotr Homczyński, University of Łódź. Thank you for all your presentations. I have maybe question or maybe comment also. The comment is, maybe this is the time for sociology to coming back what founding fathers wanted to put in front of sociology. So fixing social problems and confronting social problems. Maybe this is the time, the high time to do that. This is also the question of moral obligation. Sometimes we are hearing about the think tanks that are highly influenced by global players, pharmaceutical ones, economic, and some others, also oil companies, and they are financing some kind of researchers that are highly opposite to what is really known about the negative impact of companies and human beings on our planet. Also, I highly agree with what Professor Williams and Professor Konecki also said about huge social problems, sexual harassment, human trafficking, but also death zones and producing death zones. So my question is, as for the presidents, what institutional steps we can take to prevent, maybe not prevent, but minimalize, reduce, making society more conscious about reactions, about what we can do to prevent. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sława Salome. Thank you for a great presentation, and I wanted to connect a little bit with the Professor Skomska last comment about we are in this stage where science receives more responsibility, moral responsibility. In context of this, I wanted to refer to 2 presentations, especially Professor Hanafi, about social science, that we focus on production of knowledge, where, whom it addresses and for what. And when I think about this, I think that there is additional element to it. It's not only what science produces and for whom, but also where is the knowledge production. And what Professor Skomska was referred to modernity as the beginning of the rational knowledge that is based on evidence. I think that we have now competing production of knowledge or knowing the world that undermines our existence as a science that functions based on evidence, on exchange, a rational exchange of points of view, and these fake facts, I think that come out of seeking dignity in the wrong places and undermines our effectiveness as scientists who can bring change based on moral commitment. So my concern is, what do we do as sociologists? I appreciate very much your positive approach within the context of European science, that it produces the new model of engaged citizen. So it is this new actor that is producing knowledge, but we assume that the knowledge that it produces, it is within the same mode as we understand as science. But I think that we are more and more in the context of a worldview that is irrational, that is emotional, and it's not really producing exchange and discussion. It produces lack of trust, it produces animosities, and I think that this element is quite important for sociologists to start to understand where do we stand in context of this new actor. Thank you.
For your comment, someone else? Oh, yes.
Wiesław Gumuła, Jagiellonian University and Central Bank of Poland. Ladies and gentlemen, a few days ago I read the book The Legal Change in the Post-Communist States by Professor Peter Salomon and Kaja Gadowska. This book shows that politicians and lawyers don't need sociology, including the sociology of law. Politicians won't act in, let's say, in the cultural context of social ignorance. They treat the social ignorance as, let's say, the gift of the god. That is spoiled by sociologists. So I think that the question is more deep than one of how to communicate the social knowledge to the public. I think the problem is one of why so many social actors won't act in the disguise of social ignorance. And you gave us a lot of interesting answers on this question. Thank you.
Thank you. So perhaps we stop at this moment and give a possibility to answer the question, to address the questions. So let's start in the order of presentation. So please, Sabihana.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all this converging, actually, questions about specific issues. But let me start by Kaya to say, I mean, exactly as we know that trickling down economy doesn't have meaning. It means that the benefit of economy didn't trickle down. The same thing, the research need a researcher to work on a different outlets. I mean, to spend more time talking with the public and to go to policy orienting, do effort about recommendations. I cannot tell you the violence often when in the promotion. I served many years as in advisory committees, and I did analysis of how faculty are promoted in universities like American University of Beirut, where is often we don't look to the all this beyond what is published in so-called highly impact journals. So yes, I mean, this is there is no panacea. There absolutely, it's a long process to do. Grazina, thank you so much for the raising the question of moral aspect of sociology, and let me again refer to Bruno Latour, where he argue. I mean, he worked a lot on climate change, and he argued that wrongly, after many years, thought about, and theorized the concept of the denialism, I mean, denying facts, that more and more believe that no, people know about climate change, but they don't feel that belong to the land where they live. They so he talk about ethical crisis, if you like, what you call moral. I mean, and yes, now we need to rethink really whether facts can we thought about it without values, or we need. I mean, again, I read recently the book of Weber about science as a vocation. I mean, I think we can now heavily criticize Weber. I mean, in many aspects, how he theorized this relation between fact and value. And I do understand him in the time of the emergence of Nazism, and he wanted to protect the university. It's yeah. I mean, again, but I mean, now to apply even to wrongly translate his concept. I don't know in German, but it was translated in French into axiomic neutrality, which is not what he said. He think that there is a parallel argument should be done. One is based on value and one not. So yes, where is knowledge production? I mean, here where I mean, let me be provocative and saying, if today the major the major alternative facts and false facts about migration come from media, from even from the different level of publication, I am wonder whether we need the help of how to create common culture about the migration. So so to struggle against false facts, maybe we should bring the very Pope who in Rome who come and said that each Christian family should receive refugees. This is how I connect, if you like, ethics with knowledge. That maybe we need to think about with whom we do alliance. Not alliance, not necessarily. It's not a question of alliance, but I mean we need the dichotomy we created between what is rational, what is not rational, between religion and science. All this should be maybe break it somehow and reconfigure a new common culture where we can advance the urgent issues, problem of environmental and social problems. I stop here.
Okay, thank you very much for these questions. I think it's very good for the debate. Maybe I'll start also with why, what can we do with politicians with the link, Kaya said that, the link also to the last intervention. I think that many years ago we have been saying like that we do like excellent research, but politicians, they don't listen to us. Yeah, so we have always this discourse, no, from it's not only social scientists, all scientists say that. No, we are very good, but they don't listen to us. Yeah, but now I think that Also there was this push for evidence-based policy, which is like policy should be based on research. But still, I mean, now we're going one step further, which is, it links to the last intervention, last question, which is that what needs to be reinforced is this dialogic process, dialogic evidence-based policy. Because no guarantee that, I mean, of course, I mean, nobody voted us, so why they should say what they should do what I say, no? So we have to provide evidence what it's good for society, but also like do this in dialogue with society and with the stakeholders, no? And there's a lot of research about successful actions that are preventing poverty, that are reducing, creating a better life. So how we should provide evidence and engage with citizens and stakeholders and different sectors of society. So together with to show this to politicians. So we cannot do this alone. They do. I mean, if we go and say like we are scientists, we should do what we say, this will never work. So I think that we need this dialogic kind of process, no? And also I want to link this to this comment that you made about that we talk about we need to engage with society, but if we look at the population, there are also emotional, irrational kind of society we're living in, and we have to take this into account. I have to say that when we as social scientists, we engage in all these processes, we find many citizens, they are knowledgeable and they want to know and they want to engage in this, no? So, and I put an example of, I was leading a research about solidarity in Europe. So in times of crisis, in times of economical, social crisis, that it seemed that crisis of Europe, no, Europe is going apart. So what happened at the citizen level? And also we did a survey about solidarity, and one thing that we did in this survey is that we asked questions about immigration, refugees, and we asked to citizens, no, would you agree that your country gives like universal health coverage for undocumented immigrants in your country? And many people answered no. Yeah, it varies by countries. No? It was true all over Europe. But then later in the questionnaire, there was another question, which is like providing evidence. No? So research have demonstrated that when you have universal health coverage to all population, you reduce infection, you have better access for all. So a lot of data how this improves, and the answer changed. And this happened also. It changed. So. If and this was, I mean, something like a test that we did, no, and actually in many issues related to migration, no, in different countries around Europe, even in countries where, I mean, the political discourse is different, no, from the top. But when you go to the citizens, you have different kind of when you provide information. So what I'm saying is that also maybe it's a moral aspect that you bring, no, to sociology, to do research about social problems, but to engage with citizens and in this maybe public sociology kind of dimension, no? And one last thing about what can we do from institutions to making society more aware, no? There are already institutions, and what can we do with associations? At least the European Sociological Association is member of the European Alliance for Social Sciences and Humanities, which is an alliance that trying to lobby at the European level to make, maybe in Brussels, no, to make them more aware if there is this shift of the framework program and the Commission towards co-creation, towards sustainable development goals. These are the goals, no? So this needs to be also, if there is the shift, it needs to be, needs to go down to the funding, it needs to go down to where the evaluation panels, whether we are present or not. So this alliance with social scientists, with sociologists, social anthropologists, educators, political scientists, it's a way of having a stronger voice at the European level to say, okay, if you're saying that, make us visible, give us funding, of course, no? And which is playing a major role now at the European level, this kind of alliance. And I think as institutions, it's good that we have this kind of alliances.
Well, there is one aspect I can't leave as it is, and that is about Max Weber, who was a moralist, and very consciously so, and he precisely insisted on sociologists not overwhelming simply citizens but with that knowledge when it concerned political decisions, but every citizen should be equal in their political decisions. So it was not, this value neutrality didn't mean or didn't entail a lack of a moral dimension. It was expressly there. Now, the other thing that Kaya asked about what we as sociologists should do. But first of all, I cannot forget about the political context. Right now, we live in Hungary, we live in a new authoritarianism, which means that basically all the media are dominated by it's actually a state party, so the dominant party, and the only difference to the previous times is that there was really a demand for samizdat literature 30 years ago, and you could produce for that, and you could also produce subsequent. Of course, there is the internet and there is social media, but the interest for that kind of product is much smaller in range. That's one thing. The other thing is that it's not a problem to translate the results of scientific research, of scholarly research, into everyday language. What is really a problem, that is access, that is reach the public. So you might want to be sort of so understandable as you will. If people are not interested, that's very difficult, and that's what the gentleman also suggested, that politicians are not interested in sociology. If anything, it's very much against all their plans. So sociology generally had this vocation of spreading knowledge, of revealing whatever was hidden, but politicians are not interested in revealing their hidden truths. So in that sense, I'm not very pessimistic. So I basically don't see, and I don't believe that if there is a new European Union framework, whatever, for research, we know very well how this is done, and by the time the appropriate documents are produced, it has got very little to do whatever field research had discovered a few weeks before. And one more thing that I didn't have time to say, that is the Academic Research Institute in Sociology has just been eliminated in my country. So it's not that, and it is supposed to be attached, some parts of it, to the universities, but the universities had been already put under kind of government control that makes it impossible for them to either to integrate the Academic Research Institute sociologists or to produce, let's say, oppositional science again. So it's much more difficult, and it's not just a question of good moral intentions. It's a question of a completely new institutional setup that, for example, concerning the academic research institutes, there had been protests from the academy itself, from university, all academics, domestic and abroad, and from all the academic associations all over Europe, and the government just doesn't care. So we could have these demonstrations every week. It's just useless. So in that sense, it's a completely new situation where we haven't yet found the means to get ahead.
Wow. In that context, what I'm about to say is going to sound really weird. I don't believe in morality. I am not personally a moral person. You've given me more reasons to think of myself as not a moral person. I think that when I do sociology, I don't try to tell people what they should and shouldn't do. I speak more from the vantage point of a critic, and I see that as sociology's most valuable role, is to criticize what is and to point out the failures of our societies and our institutions. When they claim to be holding up dignity and democracy, to say, wait a minute, as you say, the emperor has no clothes. But it's not me telling people how they should believe or what their values ought to be. I think that sociologists have long complained that they don't listen to us, what's wrong with them. Auguste Comte said that sociologists should be philosopher kings, and that we should set morality for society in general, and that they should come running to us with their moral dilemmas. I think he's wrong. He was wrong for saying that. He was interesting for saying that. I'm not saying that we would do a worse job than other people in telling people how they ought to behave morally, but it's not how I think of myself. In the 1950s, in American sociology, that was probably the high point of sociologists being listened to by the politicians of the day. I'm not sure I'm proud of what they did in the 1950s. I'm not sure that they were the right people to be consulting about how to destabilize Central American governments and bring the colonialist and imperialist interests of the United States abroad. But yet they were consulted daily. They were paid to do research to help advance that mission. So I'm always very skeptical. I mean, when we saw Michael Borovway's scheme, the role of critic was undermined. To me, that's where we need to bolster our role. We just need to continually point out how the facts either confirm or deviate from people's claims about why they're doing what they're doing, and show what the consequences, both intended or not, are of their various actions within society. So wow, that's where I'm coming from.
I mean, this is excellent point, Christine. And I was just thinking that it can be split into two things. One is our intentions to try to be guiding others and what should be, and our ability as scientists to determine what's better. And I think that we are failing, or we see huge limitations for us. In a sense, for us as scientists, that we discovered how little we know. When it came to the whole transformation in Eastern Europe, right before there was a collapse of socialism, basically social scientists determined that there is almost stabilization of the system. So we were unable to predict. And what the last presentation was talking about in the language of organizational theory, I think it's about bounded rationality. The production of amazing amount of pollution and all of this, it's our inability to create a better world for us. So let alone us as scientists try to say what should be. So going back to my earlier point, the decrease of respect for scientific knowledge that comes from this fake news kind of approach, or approach of I don't want vaccination, I don't believe in it, I don't believe in all sorts of other scientifically established facts, deals with the limitations we have of to basically understand what's going on. It's a rapid change. We don't follow technology. We don't understand where the technology in all its implication leads us to. So I think we have a double problem. Can we try to be philosophers and be the elite who guides others? And already others said, thank you, but we are not really interested. And then, so I am very much for what you said, that we should try to be critics and try to do the best analysis we can, because in that way we can be instrumental instrumental in the sense of helping resolve some issues. That's
I think the function of sociology and social science has a different function, including, by the way, I study how in a country like Syria, where is a total regime authoritarianism, how sociologists were helpful on doing some research on poverty, etc. But I mean, they didn't touch the regime. I think sociology would have many functions, but so critical is a fundamental. So I am not absolutely saying, but I mean, we can imagine social science where also has another function, and this is, and I think more and more we know that science robustness is not by the quality of the evidence of the criticism, the evidence, if you like, but it's a socially constructed, and socially constructed, it means that we should see how it's constructed as a scientific research. So who fund the research, etc. But all the relation to general culture, to common culture, to the society in general. And here, I don't see how social scientists can be influential without putting their nose with the civil society. I mean, I think here where our normativity, we should be part of the civil society with all. I mean, I'm not saying civil society is always like a progressive, etc. I mean, you have a different form of, but we just an example. I think in Lebanon, in spite of the bad, the negative side I brought about that they didn't influence decision maker, they influence. Actually, they stopped the project. It was a project of creating place for burning, etc. Because they were part of the civil social movement. So they influence the civil society and things like that. So I think we need to admit that our connection to our normativity with civil society is inherent part of our research, of our methodology. That is not, our research doesn't stop by uttering our criticism. We need to go and test this criticism on the ground. And actually, the book of Arlie Hirschhorn, A Stranger in Their Own Land, about the Tea Party supporters, is really to tell us that actually we sociologists in United States, we are yuppie, we live in Chicago, New York, and Los Angeles, and we didn't go to the deep place to see whether our beautiful human rights ideas and etc. Can fit to population. Yeah. So I think really we need to go beyond just this to say just we provide criticism and the other to trickle down this criticism into project. No, we need to be part of this.
Very short reply.
Just last comment. I'm very sorry for that because I have to keep an eye on time, and we are running out of time. And there is a young lady, a young colleague of us, who is waiting to present the new journal. So please, Krzysztof, and at this last comment we will finish.
Okay. Politicians are not interested in sociology. I heard this. But sociologists are interested in politics, at least in Poland. And I think that sociologists should be interested in politics, not only in the sense of doing research and give some diagnosis and so on, but also in their engagements in the real politics and in real social initiative that create or keep and repair the life world. Critics, yes, I agree. We always were critical. Even Parsons was critical in his structuralism and functionalism to repair the system. And concerning my presentation, deaf world, it's not bounded rationality only that created the problems. It's not only the problems is because of shadowing, camouflage, ignoring, not noticing something that is around us. Concerning the mind, going in the direction pointed out by George Herbert Mead, we have mind is created in the interaction with our environment. Then we have death world in our mind. I'm showing here, but we can show to heart and so on. We have this death world, but it's covered. We should open it and show it, and it's also critics what is going around us, but also what is going in us. We are, as a sociologists, are in the same way responsible for deaf world, deaf zones, as communities, as other people, as politicians. We are the part of this society, and we should participate actively. This is my opinion. It is some kind of engaged sociology that I'm supporting, and contemplative sociology is this kind of sociology that is not pretending, I say this strong words, pretending objectivity and distance. I'm researching, but I'm part of this reality that I'm researching on. This is my answer, and the values are very important, I think, that we follow or just have in mind. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. And it was a wonderful and really inspiring session, I think, and very fruitful. So I would like to express my gratitude and appreciation to our guest and also to all the participants. We are particularly grateful for your comments, even in this late session. And we are planning to publish the proceedings of the session, so we really appreciate all the comments, all the questions and so on. So thank you so much. Thank you again. And now a short presentation of a journal, new journal that is now being published, so please.
Hello. My name is Justyna Kościńska. I'm a PhD student at the University of Warsaw. I have a small presentation and I won't take a lot of time. I don't know how to open it. In your welcome back, you all received a leaflet concerning global dialogue. It's not actually a very new journal, it's rather a magazine published by International Sociological Association since few years now. And I'm a part of Polish editorial board, and I would like to say a few words about it. And 7 years already, in Poland a bit less, 5 years I think. And I wanted to invite you to contribute, as well as maybe to share with your students and colleagues. Global dialogue touches the issues from all over the globe. Can we make it full screen? And it also invites authors to write about Polish issues. And here you can see the example of an issue which was published in December last year with some part about Polish sociology. And I wanted to say that you are all invited to contribute as well in this magazine. It appears 3 times a year in 17 languages, in English, but also in Kazakh, in Chinese, in Hindi, and in Polish. And Polish translation is coordinated by PhD students from the University of Warsaw Institute of Sociology. And we are all the time searching for translators and also people who would like to help us with coordination of this editorial board. So if you know anyone who would be interested, or you are maybe interested, feel free to contact us. This is our email. You can find us on Facebook as well, our Polish edition of Global Dialogue, and all the magazine is digital and open access. And if you have any more questions, I will be present at the conference during the whole time, so feel free to talk to me. And thank you very much, and thank you for the possibility of this small presentation.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And well, that's the end of our session, so I hope we will meet during the remaining 3 days. Thank you.